When the letter finally found her, Mara Hayes had already run out of places that felt like later. You don't keep a calendar when sleeping between shelters and parking lots. Days are marked by which manager told you no and which stranger told you to move. That morning, she and her daughter sat on warm concrete behind a laundromat, sharing the last of a gas station sandwich, when a mail truck pulled in like it had taken a wrong turn into their life. The driver glanced around, then held up a plain brown envelope. "Anyone here Mara Hayes?" The name sounded too clean in the open air. Mara stood slowly, brushing crumbs from her thrift store coat. "Yeah," she said, "that's me." The driver checked the label like he didn't quite believe it, then handed it over, along with a small electronic pad for her signature. "Certified," he said. "Forwarding address." Finally caught up. Forwarding address, she thought, as if you could forward anything to a woman whose zip code kept changing. Ava, 10 years old and bone-thin under an oversized hoodie, watched with sharp curiosity that had seen too much. "Is it bad?" Ava whispered. "Could be anything," Mara said, though experience told her anything usually meant bills or bad news. The return address said law offices of Colton and Myers in small black print. Lawyers. Her stomach tightened. She waited until the truck pulled away before she slit the envelope with a thumbnail and unfolded the letter. The words swam a little, the legal phrasing, the dates, but one line pinned everything in place. "You are the sole heir of the estate of Eleanor Ward, her grandmother. A mountain, a cabin, a childhood she'd stuffed into the farthest drawer of her mind." Ava leaned closer, hair falling into her eyes. "What's it say?" "It says," Mara answered slowly, "that Grandma Ellie died, and she left me her place." The word place tasted strange, bigger than a room and smaller than a home. Mara hadn't seen her grandmother in over a decade. Eleanor Ward had lived on the side of a mountain in a cabin that smelled like pine, mildew, and wood smoke. Insisting the world up there was all she needed. Mara's mother had called it that dead-end ridge and dragged her daughter away at 17, promising city lights and better chances that never arrived. Now that forgotten ridge was calling her back. The letter said the taxes were current, the property cleared of debts, the key taped to the back. Mara flipped the page and felt metal under her fingers. Cold, real, a weight that turned the shaky words on paper into something you could actually walk into. "We can go there?" Ava asked. She tried to sound casual, but the question shook at the edges. Mara looked at the key, then at her daughter's two thin wrists, at the duffel that held their whole life. "If the bus still runs that way," she said. "Yeah, we can try." The ride took most of what she had left. A ticket to the nearest town, a second ticket for Ava at the reduced child's fare, 2 paper cups of thin coffee from a vending machine that still believed in exact change. As the city thinned into fields and the fields rose into hills, Mara felt her chest tighten with each mile. The last time she'd left these mountains, she'd sworn never to come back, convinced that distance could erase the taste of disappointment. Now distance was folding on itself, bringing her right back to where all the running started. Ava pressed her forehead to the bus window, watching trees blur into dark green smears. "Did you live there long?" she asked. "Long enough to know every creak in the floorboards," Mara said. She remembered summer's storms that turned the sky purple. Her grandmother humming tunelessly while stirring something on the stove, the way the wind sang when it squeezed through the eaves at night. She also remembered arguments in low, urgent voices between her mother and Eleanor. The words, waste, stubborn, ruining your life, slamming against this land, is all we have. Then one day, the car was packed, and the mountain shrank in the rear view. The bus dropped them at a tired station in a valley town that hadn't forgiven the factories for leaving. Main Street wore its history like peeling paint. They walked past shuttered storefronts and a diner that still smelled like bacon grease and tired hope, then followed the cracked sidewalk to the law office listed in the letter. Inside, air conditioning hummed with outdated ambition. A receptionist slid a clipboard forward. A man in a cheap suit led them to a conference room that felt too formal for their threadbare coats. He explained probate, estates, and the smallness of what people think they own. In the end, what mattered was simple. A cabin on 3 acres of steep land halfway up Grayback Ridge, a patchwork of trees and rock and one sagging roof. It's not worth much on paper, the lawyer said, shuffling pages. But it's clean. No liens, no back taxes. He pushed a slim folder toward Mara. Sign here, and it's officially yours. The pen felt heavier than it should. She thought of all the times she'd signed things that took options away. Termination forms, shelter check-ins, bus vouchers. This was the first time a signature seemed like it might open something. She wrote her name carefully. Outside, Ava tilted her face toward the ridge looming behind the town. Grayback rose in blue-gray layers, shoulders piled on shoulders. Clouds clung to its upper slopes like thoughts that wouldn't quite form. "That's where it is?" she asked. "Up?" Mara said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. The bus that ran halfway up the mountain now only went on weekends during tourist season. It was Thursday in late fall, off-season and off-schedule, so they walked. Packs were light because there wasn't much to carry, but the road climbed relentlessly, trading houses for trees, cracked asphalt for gravel, noise for muffled wind. The deeper they went, the more the present peeled back. Mara recognized things she hadn't thought about in years. A rusted mailbox leaning at a stubborn angle, a bend in the road where the guardrail gave up decades ago, a mossy boulder shaped like a sleeping bear. With each landmark, the girl she'd been walked a little closer to the woman she'd become. Ava noticed the same shift, even if she didn't know why. "You're quieter," she said. "The mountain does that," Mara answered. Her grandmother had always claimed the ridge listened more than it spoke. At the time, Mara had just rolled her eyes. By the time they reached the narrow dirt track that served as a driveway, the light had thinned into late afternoon silver. The cabin emerged slowly from behind a stand of firs, a small tired shape pressed against the rock face as if trying to hide. Weathered boards sagged at the edges, the roof shingles curled like old paper. The single front step sat crooked, half swallowed by moss, but the chimney still stood straight, and smoke stains around its mouth whispered that fire once lived there stubbornly. Ava stopped beside her, breathing hard. "It's tiny," she said. She didn't mean it as an insult. "It used to be bigger," Mara replied. "I think I shrank." Up close, the place looked like it had been holding its breath. The windows were filmed with grime, some cracked, one patched with cardboard and duct tape. No sign of recent footprints. Only the delicate tracks of animals weaving in and out of the underbrush. The key from the letter fit the lock. After a few persuasive jiggles, the door opened with a soft groan, releasing a smell of dust, cold ashes, and something faintly floral. Lavender, maybe, clinging stubbornly to the air like a memory that refused eviction. Inside, the cabin was essentially one large room split by intention rather than walls. To the left, a kitchen area, wood stove, chipped counters, shelves lined with jars that once held summer. To the right, a narrow bed beneath a window, a rocking chair, a low table scarred by decades of mugs. Between them stood a small wooden trunk with metal corners, the kind that promised secrets even when empty. Dust lay thick on everything, softening edges, but the bones of the place were solid. Ava stepped carefully, her sneakers leaving crisp tracks. She lived here alone, longer than anyone thought she would, Mara said. They dropped their bags by the door. Mara's first instinct was to start cleaning. Survival had taught her that claiming space meant making it livable as fast as possible. She opened windows to let air exchange its stories with the outside. She swept mouse droppings and broken leaves into a pan, each scrape of the broom exposing more of the warped floorboards. Ava explored with quiet intensity. She touched the back of the rocking chair, ran fingers along the shelf of jars, studied a faded photograph pinned beside the bed, a younger Eleanor holding a baby Mara, both squinting into sunlight as if daring it to blink first. "Why did we never come back?" Ava asked suddenly. Mara hesitated. The true answer was tangled. Pride, anger, long bus rides, her mother's bitterness, her own unsteady life. "We kept meaning to," she said. Then life kept getting louder somewhere else. Ava accepted the partial truth with a small nod. She wandered to the far wall, where a narrow door led to what passed for a back room. "Can I look?" "Go ahead," Mara answered. "Just watch your step." The back room turned out to be more closet than space, stacked with boxes and old coats that smelled of cedar and rain. Mara found a box of canned goods in the kitchen, labels faded but unexpired. She mentally calculated meals: soup, beans, rice. If the tiny propane tank outside still had anything to give. For the first time in months, the question wasn't where they would sleep, only how warm. The thought loosened something in her chest. She knelt by the wood stove, clearing ashes, feeling almost normal in the repetition of movements she'd once watched her grandmother do with half-closed eyes. "There's stuff back here," Ava called. "Like a lot of stuff." There was rustling, the soft thud of something being dragged aside. Mara brushed soot from her hands and walked toward the sound. Ava stood in the narrow back room, cheeks dust-smudged, eyes bright. Cardboard boxes towered around her, some collapsed, others intact, all marked in Eleanor's small, precise handwriting. Winter clothes, tools, books. Do not toss. But the girl's attention wasn't on the labels. It was fixed on a section of wall where the wooden planks didn't quite match. "It sounds weird," Ava said. She rapped her knuckles lightly. A hollow ring answered. The rest of the wall sounded solid, stubborn. This part sounded like a held breath. Mara's heartbeat picked up. Her grandmother had never mentioned a hidden space. Then again, Eleanor had never been generous with information, only with warnings. "People will take what they can, baby. Don't give them your map." Mara ran her fingers along the uneven seam where one plank overlapped another. There, almost invisible, lay the faintest outline of a small door, cut into the wall and disguised with a careful intention. The handle was nothing more than a bent nail hammered flush. Mara slid her fingernails underneath and tugged. At first, the wood resisted, glue and time conspiring. Then it shifted with a reluctant sigh, revealing darkness. Ava sucked in a breath. "Secret room," she whispered as if saying it too loud might make it vanish. Behind the narrow door was a cavity carved into the rock itself, deeper than Mara expected. A few wooden shelves had been wedged into place. On them lay neat stacks of notebooks bound with twine, old cigar boxes, and a single metal cash box the size of 2 stacked paperbacks. Everything was arranged with careful economy. Nothing jumbled or forgotten. This wasn't clutter. It was intention. Eleanor Ward might have been stubborn, but she had never been careless. Mara reached in and lifted the cash box. It was heavier than it looked. Her palms went damp against the cold metal. The box had no obvious lock, just a latch secured with tape yellowed by years. Ava watched every movement as if witnessing someone defuse a bomb. "Do you think it's money?" the girl asked. The question held equal parts, hope and disbelief. Money lived in other people's stories, not usually in theirs. "I don't know," Mara said honestly. "If it is, it's the quietest pile of bills in history." She peeled the brittle tape away piece by piece, heart thudding. The latch lifted with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the small room. For a moment, she didn't open it. Memories rushed in. The way her grandmother used to stop mid-sentence when certain topics approached. The way she'd grip her mug tighter whenever the town or the company or the word land came up. Mara had thought it was just old anger calcifying. Now, with this hidden box in her hands, she wondered what exactly Eleanor had been carrying. "You okay?" Ava asked quietly. "Yeah," Mara murmured, just listening to the mountain, to the house, to the version of herself who'd left this place without looking back. She took a slow breath, then lifted the lid, bracing herself for whatever shape her grandmother's last secret had decided to take. Inside the box wasn't the neat stack of bills Ava had silently wished for, but something stranger and heavier. On top lay a folded letter with Mara's name written in Eleanor's tight, tidy cursive. Beneath it, a small brass key taped to an index card, an old photograph curling at the corners, and a leather-bound notebook swollen with use. No loose coins, no jewelry flashing an easy answer. Just paper ink in the sense that her grandmother had finally decided to keep talking from the other side of silence. Ava shifted impatiently. "Well, what is it?" she breathed. Mara sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, box between her knees, hands trembling just enough that the paper rustled when she unfolded the letter. The first lines hit like a voice she hadn't heard in years. "If you're reading this, it means the mountain finally called you home. Stubborn girl." Eleanor wrote about years of scraping by, about arguing with the town and the company over the spring that ran under their land, about how some truths were too big to yell in public. So I wrote them down. The letter said, "I kept them safe until you were ready." The letter mentioned the bank key, the notebook, and the rest of it, which she said was hidden. "Where the floor remembers." Mara frowned at that line. The notebook, when she cracked it open, overflowed with dates, names, groundwater readings, copies of letters she'd sent to officials who never answered. Ava lost interest in the dense handwriting and started tapping the floorboards with the side of her shoe, listening. One board near the back wall gave a sharper, hollower sound, like the wall had earlier. "Here," she said. "It's like the floor is lying." It felt right that the daughter heard it first. Mara slid the rug aside and pressed her palm against the plank. The wood flexed just enough to reveal a narrow gap. Someone, Eleanor obviously, had cut a careful rectangle and dropped it back into place. With a grunt and a wedge of her fingers, Mara lifted it. Beneath lay a shallow cavity lined in tin. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were neat bundles of cash, a worn savings passbook, and another envelope, thicker and sealed with tape. Not riches beyond imagination, but more money than she'd seen in one place in years. Ava's eyes went huge. "We're rich," she whispered, almost afraid to say it. "Not rich," Mara said, throat tight, "but not starving." Her hands shook as she unfolded the passbook. The small local bank's name sat at the top, Ridgeline Credit Union. The account balance on the last inked line was more than she had earned in the year before she lost her job. Tucked inside was another card, the brass key's twin number written on it. Box 12C. The sealed envelope crinkled when she picked it up. On the front, Eleanor had written, "Bring this to the bank. Don't let them talk you sideways. This time, we get our share." Night dropped fast, turning the cabin's interior into a dim pool of shadow around their lantern. There was no way to reach the bank now, even if it were open this late. The road would be dangerous in the dark, so they waited. Mara tried not to stare at the money, at the key, at the notebook that hummed with accusation. She forced herself into practical tasks, airing out blankets, coaxing the wood stove to life, boiling water for noodles. Ava moved more lightly than she had in months, humming under her breath, touching things with a possessive wonder. "It smells like us already," she said sleepily. Mara lay awake long after Ava's breathing smoothed into the rhythm of real rest. The cabin creaked around them, wood adjusting to new weight, heat loosening old joints. Outside, the wind pushed at the eaves, testing, then easing off. She thought of her mother, who'd left this place like it was a trap, of her grandmother, who'd stayed like it was a promise, of herself, who'd spent 10 years pretending the mountain was a dream she'd woken from. Now here she was with her daughter tucked under Eleanor's old quilt, being asked to decide which woman she wanted to resemble. Morning came thin and cold but clear. The walk down the ridge to town felt different with the bank key in Mara's pocket, as if the road itself were watching. Ava chattered more than usual, not about money exactly, but about curtains, paint colors, and what it might be like to have a room that always waited for you. When they pushed open the glass door of Ridgeline Credit Union, the bell above it jingled a sound too cheerful for the gray lobby. The teller's eyes flicked automatically to their worn clothes before settling on the envelope and key in Mara's hands. "I think my grandmother had a box here," Mara said, placing the key gently on the counter. "Eleanor Ward." At the name, something passed across the teller's face, recognition tempered by caution. She disappeared into the back and returned with a man in a near-retirement suit. "Miss Hayes?" he asked. "I'm Mr. Carlson. I knew your grandmother." His tone made new sound complicated. He examined the key, the number, then the envelope. Inside, under another layer of tape, was a notarized note authorizing my granddaughter, Mara Hayes, to access Box 12C in the event of Eleanor's death. Paperwork satisfied rules that suspicion couldn't. They followed him into a small room lined with metal doors. Carlson unlocked one, slid out a narrow box, and rested it on the table. "Take as long as you need," he said, but didn't quite leave, as though curiosity had chained him to the doorway. Mara swallowed and lifted the lid. Inside lay more carefully folded papers, original deeds, copies of water tests, correspondence stamped with the mining company's logo, and nestled at the bottom like an afterthought, a bundle of government bonds and an old checkbook from an account Mara hadn't known existed. Numbers marched across them in neat, almost unreal rows. For a moment, she couldn't form words. Ava reached past her, small fingers brushing a sheet that bore a thick gold seal. "What is it?" The heading read, "Settlement Agreement. Ward vs. Grayback Mineral Resources Draft Not Executed." Below, Eleanor's familiar handwriting annotated the margins with angry, looping notes. "They think I'm stupid. Won't sign until it's fair. They're trying to buy my silence for pennies." Attached was a final letter from the company withdrawing the offer when she refused. Eleanor hadn't lost. She'd simply never been paid because she wouldn't bend. The notebook back at the cabin suddenly felt heavier. Carlson cleared his throat softly. "Your grandmother was persistent." He said she believed the company owed her for using the spring under her land. Some folks thought she was chasing ghosts. He gestured at the bonds. "She did save what she had. Those matured nicely. You're looking at well enough. Enough. Enough to fix the cabin, clear every debt, and still stand on steady ground. Enough to keep Ava from ever sleeping in the back of a car again." Mara's tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She'd imagined this moment in small, desperate fantasies, but reality felt stranger, thicker, like air before rain. They signed forms until her hand cramped. Carlson spoke numbers and percentages that floated around her like birds she couldn't quite catch. He offered to connect her with a financial advisor so you don't get taken advantage of. The irony of that, given the town's history with her grandmother, was almost funny. Almost. As they stepped back onto the sidewalk, Ava clutched her hand. "So, are we okay now?" Mara looked at the quiet street, the ridge rising behind it, the bank where her grandmother's stubbornness had slept in a metal drawer for years. "We're safer," she said. "That's a start." But Eleanor's secret wasn't just money. Back at the cabin, Mara spread the contents of the box and the notebook across the table. Ava helped flatten pages. The story unfolded slowly. Years of the mining company diverting water, quietly pumping from the spring under their land to feed operations down the ridge. Eleanor had documented levels before and after, photographed dead fish, written letters to agencies that thanked her, and filed her complaints under crank. The draft settlement proved the company knew there was risk. Their withdrawal letter dripped condescension. "We deny any wrongdoing, but wish to avoid further friction." Translation: "We think you'll quit." "She never did," Ava said softly, tracing a finger along one of the dates. "She just ran out of time." Mara felt heat sting behind her eyes. For years, she'd carried a quiet resentment toward her grandmother, convinced Eleanor cared more about land and water than people, more about principle than family. Now she saw another woman entirely, one who'd tried to shield what little they had from being siphoned away, one who'd refused to be purchased cheaply, even when poor. Mara picked up a pen and scribbled numbers in the margin of the settlement draft, converting old figures to modern equivalents. Her breath caught. If Eleanor had signed, even their lowball offer would have been a life-changing amount, indexed for time and inflation. It was enormous. "They still owe us," Ava murmured, reading over her shoulder. Kids, Mara thought, have a ruthless clarity adults wrap in doubt. The mining company had rebranded and moved most operations, but its successor still existed. Harper, the lawyer, the librarian, had mentioned in passing, when Mara asked about legal help for anything beyond wills and traffic tickets, sat in an office at the edge of town that looked like a house preparing to argue zoning laws with God. Mara made an appointment. Harper turned out to be late 30's hair escaping its clip, eyes that looked like they'd seen too many verdicts go the wrong way and decided to keep fighting anyway. She listened as Mara laid out the notebook, the draft settlement, the water tests, the bank documents. She read in silence for a long time, lips compressing, fingers tapping once, when she had a letter where the company described Eleanor as combative and emotionally driven. Finally, she looked up. "You have more than most people who walk in here," she said. "You have a paper trail and proof of intent." They knew. They lowballed. She refused. "Does that matter now?" Mara asked. "She's gone. The spring's still here." Harper leaned back. "Statutes of limitation on some things, yes. On others, maybe not. Especially if they continue benefiting from that water source or never remedied the damage. Even if we can't sue for the past, we might force a new agreement. Back pay, fair rates, protections, and they will hate it because it opens questions about how many other combative landowners they underpaid." She glanced at Ava. "It would be a fight. Grandma already started it," Ava said. "We're just finishing." Out of the mouths of 10-year-old prophets, Mara thought. In the months that followed, the cabin changed slowly, the way people do when they finally accept kindness. A new roof stopped the midnight drip into buckets. The worst of the drafts were tamed with insulation and properly fitted windows that still allowed the mountain to look in. Mara bought a second-hand wood stove that wasted less heat, a small generator for emergencies, and for Ava, a bright quilt that looked like sunrise against the log walls. She signed Ava up for the local school. The girl came home with red cheeks and stories that weren't about shelters or keeping your head down. The legal fight moved more slowly, as legal fights do. Harper sent letters, requested records, prodded sleeping bureaucrats. The company's lawyers replied with polished denials, then with preliminary offers that sounded suspiciously like the one Eleanor had already rejected. "They think you're tired," Harper said one afternoon, dropping a thick envelope on the table. "They're betting you'll accept less, just to be done." Mara thought of the nights in the car, of Ava's thin shoulders, of her grandmother's careful handwriting. "We're not that tired," she said. There were offers they refused, counter-offers made. Eventually, faced with bad publicity and a case that wouldn't die, the company relented. The new agreement didn't rewrite history, but it acknowledged it. They paid a substantial sum into a trust in Eleanor's name to maintain the spring and surrounding land, and a separate settlement directly to Mara as heir. Not as large as the original might have been, but enough to secure their future several times over. More importantly, to Eleanor's ghost, perhaps they signed binding documents recognizing prior use rights and promising independent monitoring. The local paper ran a modest headline. People in town talked a bit louder about how that old woman up on the ridge hadn't been crazy after all. Mara read the article at the kitchen table, fingers resting on the newsprint. "Does it feel fixed?" Ava asked that night, sitting on the porch step. As the last light slid off the ridge, Mara watched the cabin windows glow warmly from within, smoke rising from the chimney in a confident line. "It feels more honest," she said. "The mountain always knew. Now other people have to admit it too." She looked at her daughter, who no longer flinched at every passing truck. "You found that door?" she added. "If you hadn't knocked on that wall." Ava shrugged, embarrassed. "It sounded wrong," she said, like it wanted someone to ask. Her curiosity had changed everything. The title of homeless mom fell away, not in a single moment, but in 100 quiet ones. The first night they slept without shoes near the bed, ready to run. The afternoon, Ava asked if they could plant strawberries because we'll be here long enough to eat them. The day Mara realized she knew which mug in the cupboard she liked best, simply because it was always there waiting. Sometimes she walked outside after dark, listening to the creek under the rocks, to wind in the pines, to the low murmur of water that now legally and spiritually belonged partly to them. One evening, months after that first letter found them behind the laundromat, Ava stood in the doorway of the little back room, where the secret compartment now sat open and empty. The notebooks had been copied and stored safely. The cash box held only a few keepsakes. The first bank receipt with Mara's name, a photograph of Eleanor holding baby Mara, and the brass key that had opened everything. You were really speechless, Ava said, remembering that moment in the bank when numbers and history collided. I've never seen you like that. Mara laughed softly. Some things are too big for words, she said for a minute. Anyway, she stepped beside her daughter, resting an arm around her shoulders. Together, they looked at the tidy hollow in the wall. No longer a hiding place, but a kind of shrine. What are you going to keep in there now? Ava asked. Mara considered. Maybe nothing, she said. Maybe we let it stay empty for a while to remind us what it held. Or maybe she thought one day she'd tuck her own letter inside, something for Ava to find if life ever folded the wrong way again. For now, though, it was enough that the secret had turned into a story, and the story into a home.